Tuesday, 10:30, 19 seconds, year 2023, 7th month, July, the 11th day. And the recording was sabotaged. So let me start again with this recording. All right. This recording, I spoke to Spenser today, our IRS agent, who I gave him a transfer number. So I was speaking with an assistant earlier, and I got an appointment set up for Eugene office to hand in the 2019 taxes and to get a receipt for that at the office in Eugene, Oregon. So Spenser, I just needed a confirmation that the last day was July the 15th, 2023, which is a few days from now, for the 2019 taxes, according to the pandemic. Things were extended because of the pandemic. So the assister that I called this morning to set up the appointment with, she didn't know. So that's why she gave me the transfer number and then transferred me to an agent. A real an authentic and authorized, that would be a legal term, authorized IRS agent. So, anyway. So, I'm speaking to the agent, Spenser, and I didn't write his number down, but he gave the number. So it's on the record in the original recordings, phone call at the IRS, if needed to be used. So, anyway, wow. So and this guy sounded just like a judge. He was experienced in his lingo and in his security and in his tone in the voice, his confidence, just like a judge, just like he'd been around the block and he had handled many callers to see if they could keep them on the legal side. So anyway, he starts off the conversation with, I need some information so that I can capture. That was the first signal to me that I ain't dealing with just some regular IRS agent. This is an experienced one, and he knows that I'm calling because it's all connected to the IRS and the Vatican, and the military, and they're surveilling me. And they're wanting to get some things on the record, see if they can alter the conscience that I have and the contract that I hold and I advance with them. So, which it's still a wonderful thing because it's all training to me, and for them at the highest level, it's also training too. So, but there are the bad guys and the bad apples in the group. So, I got to experience once again what it's like to see how these judges operate, the legal judges on the bad side, or the testing side, or whatever. Anyway, so the first word he used was, I need information so that I can basically capture you. Because, I ain't in the box. I'm partly in the box, partly out the box, or whatever, But, so at that point, when he said that, and then he, and of course he also asked me the name, is that, this is your name or the name on file and whatnot. And so I assured to him that I was Russell E. Eskew, the real living man. And at that point, he changed a little bit in his composure and kind of had a little more gentleness and easiness in the voice. And he said, I understand, or whatever the tone was, or he was just saying that as a way to get to his next, being computer brain controlled and all that stuff too, and all that. But there's something real probably probably something real monitoring the computer, unless for some reason the computer, like the Hollywood movie, the computer took over. Wow, imagine that. That gets me to another thought that's more unconscious now, that the computer has taken over, and the computer is speaking through the humans, because I hear the same tone coming through them all, and the same techniques coming through them all. But anyway, so it finally got to the point where, he says, could you hold for 5 to 7 minutes? And at first I was saying, I could hold. And then he keeps coming back, and he's saying, is this for this? Is it for an extension? Or is it for an extension this, according to a 4686 form? Or is it for a disaster, or for disaster relief? And I kept telling him, well, it's just for as per the pandemic ruling. He says, oh, the pandemic ruling. Okay, could you hold another 5 to 7 minutes? And I says, at this point, I says, I shall hold advancing. And so he's starting to realize with the verbiage that I'm giving him that he ain't dealing with just a regular citizen. He's dealing with a lien holder on the private side. Because it finally got to the point where we started talking, he started asking me, he says, well, I have some questions for you, and I need you to answer those questions for me. And he kept rattling off, the questions are, is this inquiry, or whatever word he used, so is this for, you want to know the extension date? Or you want to know that it's for disaster relief? And da-da-da-da-da, and da-da-da-da-da, and da-da-da. And I kept telling him, I says, for and on the record, I was using that all the time. For and on the record, Russell E. Eskew as a living man, I didn't necessarily say that, but through parts, as the phone conversation was going on and on and on, I was referencing that, and it could all be put together. And he could see where I was coming from, but and he kept saying, I need answers to these questions. I need answers to these questions. I need answers to these questions. And then he said, he finally told me, he said, if you keep being combative, I'm going to have to end this phone call. And it kind of threw me off guard when he said that one. And now I know I was talking to the robot judge, because that's exactly the same techniques. I could feel the frequency. I could feel the vibration. That's exactly the same stuff that goes on in the legal courts. They just come out with statements right off the bat and assumptions. And so here, and hoping that I would agree with their assumptions and get entangled with them, start getting into some type of fight, as though just because they called it a fight, that it's a fight. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't being combative. So, and I finally got to the point with Spenser. I says, Spenser, I am not being allowed to finish what I need to say, bring forth some statements for and on the record and finish them, because you keep cutting me off. I said, I'm going to say what I need to say, and after I've finished saying what I need to say, then, then I would like a response from you. And then, but I probably would have been more more easier to say, less taxing to say, and then any responses after I finish saying what I say are welcome. But he probably kind of took it as an order, and it kind of came out as an order. Then you are allowed. Then I would like a response from you. That's an order. That's a tax, in a way. So it wasn't a freer statement that I could have brought forth, but I'm learning more and more and more to be less taxing because of the bad habit, growing up into the system, it's getting less and less hold on me, bringing more and more of the new habit. So anyway, so at that time I said what I needed to say, and I basically said this, I just really need a confirmation on, according to the first guy, I kept explaining to him on and on. I said, well, the first agent that I spoke to yesterday, he also went in and mentioned some disaster relief and stuff like that, and disaster relief stuff. And then he says, oh, well, hold on a second. Let me look into the computer a little bit further here. And then he came back and he says to me, he says, oh yeah, because of the pandemic, he said there is the extension date. The last day to hand in the 2019 taxes is 2023, July the 15th. And so, of course, I was just looking for a confirmation from Spenser that that's what was going on. But Spenser is a different agent. So I'm learning more and more that each agent has their capacity to see what kind of business how they want to handle the business. And especially certain agents, if they're trained to know that there is a private side, because that's where I come from, private side merging into the public, to see if they can quench that private side and get some type of verbal contracts on the record, because that's where they're coming from. And then they think that because they got a certain verbal contract that stands and that supersedes anything that's already written. But I've got enough contracts set in place with agreements from all the people running the corporation behind the veil, the real individuals, that it doesn't matter what I say, what verbiages I say, and according to what the agreement is, there is no change. There is going to be no assumed jurisdiction. So, forever. Unless for some reason, I think that I want to either temporarily or permanently alter the contract. But that's up to me. So anyway, when I finally finished in the statement that I wanted to say, which I was telling them, I said, the first agent, he just went back into the computer and he came back and he told me, he says, oh yeah, which Spenser would have access to that also, because they all look on the same computer. But, never know. Could be that the first agent, could have saw something, could have been wrong. That's why I was looking for a second confirmation from him. But you see, what was coming out of Spenser is that he was looking. He started becoming afraid. He started becoming afraid because he realized he's dealing with a lien holder. And it wasn't just a lien holder. He kept trying throughout the whole phone call to see how much experience I have as the lien holder position that I hold and advance. And I was using these words on the phone with him. I shall hold and I shall advance. See, to hold something in military combat, to hold ground is one thing. But to hold ground and then advance, okay, that's a different thing. And so I started letting them know that I'm holding and advancing now. Now, in other words, he's on the run. I was letting him know he's on the run. And in fact, at the end of the whole conversation, he actually ran away from me. He didn't just run, he hightailed it. He eventually started ranting and raving, and cutting me off, and he hung the phone up. Because he never let me finish the statement. Yeah, so that's really what it got down to. I really didn't finish the statement that I was saying. I just kind of paused and I told him, I can see where he's coming from now. And where he was coming from is he realized he's not speaking, he's speaking to a real living man. And not just a real living man, a lien holder. There's a contract in place. And the reason I bring that up, because one of the steps that he used, as he said, could you hold for 5 to 7 minutes? And when he came back to the phone, he completely changed the whole subject, and he says, is there an agent attached to this tax account? And at that point, I went and told him, and every time I started, and it also got to the point, every time I started giving him some information to the questions that he wanted, and he didn't like what he was hearing from me, he would cut me off and wouldn't allow me to say what I wanted to say. In other words, he was acting just like a legal judge, which is basically, the legal judges are supposedly running the whole country. And so they think it's their duty not to let me say what I need to say and to cut me off or to divert me or to throw some distraction out there to distract the focus of what I want to say. It's all psychological warfare. And I know exactly what they're up to. I can sense it. I feel the vibration over the phone with the tone, with the words that they use. And not only that, I let them know that I know what their game is up to. And that gets them really more scared. And then they start thinking for a way out, start preparing to run, either run out of the courtroom, because that's what these judges will do. When they realize they're up against something where the truth is going to come out, they'll run out of the courtroom and end the court session. Well, it's the same thing on the phones. And even in court, they have over the court. They hold court over the phones too. And I've held court over the phone. One of these judges. And but anyway, so they either run out of the courtroom And another way to run out of the courtroom is they look for a way to weasel out of the phone call. And a lot of their excuses to weasel out of the phone call is, you're not answering the questions that I want to have answered. I need to have you answer these questions, this particular question. And he kept hammering to me, is this, and I told him, well, I mentioned the computer. And when I mentioned the computer, then he came back to me and he says, well, the computer says that I have to ask you these questions. So, he kept asking the questions that the computer was asking, and he kept emphasizing, I need an exact answer to these questions that the computer is giving me. And I would not give him an exact answer that he wanted to hear. And I don't think there is a list of answers on that computer that are expected to be given back. I think that's up to the phone call, or the agent. Because each agent is trained in certain knowledge, and each agent is at different levels. And when they detect that they're not getting the answer that they want, in order to save their own butts, because that's really all it comes down to. When they realize they're talking to a lien holder over the phone, they realize that now their butt is in jeopardy, because I can get their name and add it to that contract, to the lien. Now their ass is in the fire and they got no way out of it. So it really doesn't have to do with giving an answer exactly what the computer wants, because the computer doesn't have a list of answers that the so-called citizen should be giving. The computer only has a list of specific questions that the agent has to ask over the phone. So anyway, as I finally, and I told him for and on the record, and that was another clue to him that he's speaking to someone experienced that's been around the block with this stuff. Because I was letting him know that this is a court here. I'm holding court for and on the record. And so I got done saying, for and on the record, the first agent that I spoke with, he did mention that, is this for disaster relief? Is the 2009 tax that I wanted to hand in? I'm not going to call it a return, because that's one of the things that they like to use as to feel secure with their assumed jurisdiction. Because a turn is called eternment. To return something is an eternment. In other words, that's attorney assumed jurisdiction. So a tax return is actually an attack from an attorney. Although the language and the words have been through the centuries retailored and reshaped and respelled and all that, rephrased, because it's just like being on a battlefield, because that's exactly what happens on the battlefield. You get two people on a battlefield in a fight, and usually one of them might say, I'm going to get you. I'm going to cut you down. In other words, I'm going to attack your ass, and I'm going to turn you into mincemeat. Some of the stuff that actually happens on the battlefield. So the term tax return or the phrase tax return is a battlefield cry from the bully. Now that's some serious shit when I started seeing this stuff. And the more I audit this stuff, especially for and on the record, because I'm recording this right here on this video right here. And it's going straight up to the surveillors that I'm putting stuff on the record. Yeah. So the more I audit stuff and record stuff and speak into the air, realizing that the surveillors are surveilling me, looking for a weakness in the armor, so to speak, or a weak chain, or whatever, to where they could hit me and see if they could get advantage over me, because they're always looking for a weakness, constantly, whether it be physical or psychological or whatever way. That's why I'm constantly training and constantly on guard and constantly letting the child know, that, I ain't going to be fooled. I ain't going to be taken advantage of. I ain't going to be taken down. And then I go a step further and I hand out what I call symbolically the tits for the child. To suck on, to get nutrients. And some babies need to be breastfed up till, I've seen some YouTube videos, some of these kids, they need to be breastfed up, I've seen some up to 10 years old still breastfeeding. And so, just because I'm dealing with what I can consider a baby that might not need breast milk anymore, I have to look at the situation from the answers and the reactions that I'm getting from the one that I'm quote unquote in combat with, hand-to-hand combat. Does this child need more milk, even though it's past babydom? And there's really nothing wrong with that. Some children need more milk. Sometimes I've even seen YouTube videos where there are grown men that are realizing they need to get back on the tit. And for whatever reason, could be, just comfort reasons. It might even be physical reasons. There might be something in the breast milk that needs to go into the body as an immune booster, physically. I'd have to get more study into it, but I have seen the YouTube videos where grown men finally are realizing that they want to go back to the tit, and so they suck their wife's tits or girlfriend's tits or anyone's tits, whatever it be, to get what they need to get. Like I say, whether physically, psychologically, or other reasons. So, but anyway, but in continuing on, when I told the IRS agent, I told him, I said, so, I would like to, for and on the record, finish the statement that I started without being interrupted. And at that point, he quieted down, and I said what I need to say, which is basically that, yes, the first agent looked into the computer and it said that there is an extension according to the 2019 taxes for disaster relief this, disaster relief that, or just an all-out extension with a 4686 form. But then while the agent was speaking to me, he said, "Hold on a minute. Let me look in and see if there's something according to the pandemic." And so he looked in, and he quickly came back and he says, "Well, yes, according to the pandemic, the extension date is July the 15th, 2023. And so anyway, so I was mentioning that in the statement that I was completing, while finally he stopped cutting me off. After I let him know, I says, and accusing me, he was also accusing me of being combative. But he was looking for a way out legally. In other words, I was holding a gun to his head legally, which he could call the cops and go get a cop and say, this guy's got a gun to my head. I'd like an investigation here. I wasn't being combative. In all actuality, he was the one that was being combative. In other words, he was throwing a fit. That's all really combat is. It's a fit being thrown. When it gets down to what I know universally, the relationship and the energies, the boy-girl energies and the child energies, and especially the relationship between the child and the mother. So he eventually let me somewhat finish, because I never really finished, but I at least got to kind of say what I needed to say. And then after I had said what I had said, all of a sudden a thought entered into the brain, and I had a connection with that thought and a realization that this guy, that I should just go ahead and trust what the first agent told me instead of relying on what this second agent is going to tell me, because what he's looking at going on is to come up with any answer that he wants to give, which is exactly what these judges are trained to do on these benches. They're trained to give an answer that they want to give and see if they can get someone else in a contract, whether it be verbally or written. And so I realized that's where he was going with it. And when that realization hit me, I immediately told him. I says, I see where you're coming from now, as I was finishing the statement. And I was telling him, I would like to go ahead and relieve you of your legal duty to hold this phone call with me. And I said a few other things, but I wasn't all the way finished with the statement. And at that point, he was probably feeling quite wonderful that I was relieving him from duty, because he really didn't want to continue the phone call, and he was looking for every way to weasel out of it legally, knowing that he's being recorded and his boss is going to listen to the phone call. And if he really knows what's going on, he's being surveilled live in the moment with the phone call. And so instead of really letting me finish everything, the statement that I want to bring forth for and on the record, because all phone calls are recorded, and especially the ones from the IRS. Any state phone calls, they're always recorded. Now, most of these regular corporations out here, they like to go ahead and bring it up, just like to let you know this phone call is being recorded for all quality assurance and this, and that. But, But anyway, so he didn't really let me finish for and on the record the statement that I wanted to finish. As soon as I brought up that I was going to relieve him, at that point he started in with saying, basically, well, I'm going to end this phone call now. I got to go. Da 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 da. But I wasn't finished, and so I started to let him know that I wasn't finished. But he kept running and running and running and running. In other words, as I was advancing upon him on the combat field, because he was the one that was being combative. He was attacking me. And at that point, I sent him on the run because he realized he couldn't overpower me. He realized he couldn't trick me. He couldn't manipulate me with that phone call. And I brought up, letting him know, the agent. I kept bringing up the subject, the agent, as he kept talking and talking, cut me off more, so that he could escape in some type of dignity. Until finally he just hung the phone up. But I did get a few words in before he hung that phone up, because he had asked me a question earlier in the phone call, and he says, is there an agent attached to this tax account? And I gave him some answers, and I also let him know that I wanted to add more to the agent subject, or the agent statement, or the agent, conversation, whatever word I wanted to use it. In other words, I wanted to speak to him more on the what the agent is. Have a conversation more on the agent to get more clarity. And so, as he was running and running and running, which I want to add this point too, while he had me on hold for 5 to 7 minutes, which is their traditional thing that I noticed that they got going on with their conversations on the phone now, because the first agent was going through that same procedure. Could you hold for 5 to 7 minutes? Could you hold for 5 to 7 minutes? And then they'd go to the computer and they'd research. And that's the word that this guy was using too. He was actually saying, could you hold for 5 to 7 minutes while I research on the computer? And but anyway, as I was sitting there holding, I was editing answers, knowing that the surveillors at high level are monitoring all the thoughts and the editing that I got going on in the brain. In other words, to give more clarity to any answers to the questions that Spenser, the IRS agent that I was talking with on the phone, who had just asked me, could you please hold for 5 to 7 minutes while I conduct some research here. While I was holding, I'm also bringing more clarity to the previous questions that he just asked me. And this is all being monitored on surveillance by the high-level military, the Vatican, the governments, extraterrestrials. And that they control this agent Spenser, who's now doing research. They're controlling him. And so the extraterrestrial realizes that I'm bringing more clarity. And I was actually, as I was on hold, I had never brought anything up with the agent yet. But realizing that this guy I was talking to, whose name is Spenser, realizing this guy that I was talking to, that he's a little bit more keen to what's going on in the hierarchy than the first agent, who was just a younger man. I'm dealing with an older man. I could tell by the tone and the way he swaggered on the phone. He's a much more mature older man, been around the block. And so anyway, I'm sitting there and I'm talking, or I realize I'm being surveilled, and I'm bringing up the agent, because I had told Spenser, I am the living man, and I realized where this conversation could go to now. If it came down to it, I'm thinking to myself, am I going to need to give him information, let him know that I'm a lien holder, to give him the lien number, let him know that I am an agent for that name on the tax form, which is Russell E. Eskew, because all names on a tax form are considered just a dead entity. In fact, all babies born in the hospital are considered born dead. They're assumed to be born dead. And the reason for that is because a dead baby is considered to have abandoned the funds to the Treasury credit. That's why that goes on like that. So I let them know that I'm alive, that I'm living. I'm the living man. You're talking to Russell E. Eskew, the living man. So, anyway, but, so anyway, as I was sitting there on hold, and I realized that, I'm editing and realizing that I might have to bring up the lien number to this guy, and what an agent is, what a living man is, and an agent, and let him know that there's fiduciary paperwork on the record at the IRS tax office, Form 56, hooked to a court case here in Lane County from a bank. And the fiduciary is Thomas Davis, sitting up here in Hillsboro, Oregon, the same city where Winston Shrout, the one who mentored me in private maritime law, he holds the house there through a lien position, and supposedly is in federal prison for IRS tax evasion. I'm sitting here thinking all this stuff through while I'm on hold, realizing that I'm being surveilled, and I'm editing the conversation, and the high-level militaries, the governments, and the extraterrestrials realize what's going on, and that they control this guy, and they're going to speak through this guy's voice because they're going to electronically demon possess him. So when he got back on the phone, he brought up this subject to me out of the blue, although I told him I was the real living man. He asked this question: are you the real? No, he said, is there an agent attached to this tax account? And of course, I gave him a particular answer. And I'm going to continue that answer on the next video. And I need to get this thing hooked up to electricity because the battery's getting low. So I'm going to end this video and I'm going to continue. But basically, the whole gist of the conversation is on the record and pretty much finished as far as this phone call went from beginning to the end. And I ended up telling the guy too, I said, I'm just going to trust that the first agent told me that the last day that I could hand in these taxes is July the 15th, 2023. And so anyway, I'm going to end this recording. I'm going to get this thing on battery, and I want to go into and get onto record what I told Spenser over the phone, according to the question that he asked me, which is there an agent connected to this tax account? So, because not only am I an agent, as through a lien holder on the private side, Russell Edward Eskew, agent, lien number RE 043 731 210 US. That's the registered mail connection to the last amendment to the Constitution that I wrote which is also known as a private maritime lien affidavit, sent to the military, the governments, and the extraterrestrial, and anyone else. I put in the contract that they're supposed to share it with everyone, both high and low. So I am private agent merging into the public, but on the legal side, on the public legal side, I have an attorney as a fiduciary to the name Russell Edward Eskew, assumed to be born dead through the hospital, who oversaw the pandemic, connected to the voting system and the stolen election 2020, but they're both on the same team anyway, as far as I'm concerned, but I could be wrong. Trump and Biden. And that's run through the Secretary of State, who also oversees the debtor-creditor records. Who's the real debtor, who's the real creditor, and who really went bankrupt. Of course, they put in a fake record. Just like fake media, fake news, everything's fake. Fudging all the numbers in the economy. That's the way they function. But it's not all a bad thing. The system operates in fraud out of legal necessity. But anyway, yes, I have another agent. I have a legal agent, an attorney, fiduciary. I am connected to the Bar Association also. Not only am I connected to the military, the government, and the extraterrestrials, and the CEOs, and the employees, and all the corporations, but I'm connected both privately and publicly. Secret agent, like 007, undercover, but I also function publicly. And the mission that I'm on through the Vatican and the military and the governments at high level, and they know who I am because I'm the one that brought the position into play, and I presented it to them and they agreed to it through contract. So I ain't out here in the backyard just spouting off like some crazy man. But that's part to the undercover facade that I throw out there. And not only is it a facade, it really is not a facade. Because at the same time, I am expressing the child that was stamped out through the hospitals, through the doctors, through the bad side, through the dark side. Which, like I say, isn't a bad thing. It's just the way the universe functions that I've observed. And so to me, the bad has to be there in order for me to have some type of something to resist against, because the pain and the suffering is what gets me to go to, how do I get, I need a way to get relief. So without the pain, there really wouldn't be a mechanism for me to want to get relief. And, so it's, the pain and suffering is a wonderful thing. I see it, for me, as part to living in this universe and to fulfilling what ultimately I want, is to live forever without having to lose the body. But like I say, if it happens, it happens, but that's not the end all. Just because I lost the body, it's not going to be the end all. But I prefer not to lose this particular body right here in order to get where I want, in order to be in the atmosphere that I have, the atmosphere around that I like to have. But, but although, and I say all that because, I brought up the crazy facade. Sometimes it's a facade. Sometimes I know I'm acting crazy, and crazy in a way that I on purpose crazy, because it's a repellent also. So there's a good side to being crazy or acting crazy, and there's a good side to using a repellent. Because, sometimes it's incumbent on me to repel something that's coming at me, because I'm just not in the mood to want to have to be involved with it at the particular moment. And to me, that's the ultimate freedom, just according to how I feel. So I've learned to develop repellents. Say, for instance, that there's someone walking back in this bike path, and I'm back here in the backyard, conducting certain businesses or whatever, personalities or traits or whatever, saying stuff, singing stuff, this and that, this and that. And I can sense that someone walking back in the bike path is going to want to come up to this gate and start a conversation with me, and I'm not in the mood for it. I'll immediately pick it up in the atmosphere just like that, boom. And in a split second, I'll switch to repellent mode, to where they ain't going to come up to the fence at all. Whether it be if I have to just kind of casually get it to look like I'm just walking over here, and I'll eventually walk around to the front yard and they can't see me anymore. Or I'll say something that I know is they'll probably get offended at it, and they ain't even going to want to dare. Or I'll make it look like, or bring something crazy where it looks like they come to that fence, they're going to get hurt or be in some type of escalation. And this is where I see, implementing Hollywood acting skills into certain things. But, but as far as, putting on a facade, some of it's just all naturally needs to come out, because the child, I have a child that I'm growing up to, and that child needs to be allowed to express itself and mature more and more and more and more and more and more. So I shall allow that child to what seems like something crazy out here in the backyard. I shall allow that child to enjoy the craziness and to experience it. The child that is me the child, Russell the child, that's been stamped out, that's longing more to express and come out more and grow and mature and mature and mature and mature and mature more. So, but anyway, let me get this it just cuts off. I'm going to shut this off, get this thing on battery. So, and I'll continue in the next video explaining what I told Spenser over the phone concerning his question: is there an agent attached to this tax account?